Many thanks, Lisa, for that introduction. Dear all, members of the committee, fellow researchers, colleagues and friends, thank you for this invitation. It's a great pleasure to be here with you today to address a question that is both misleadingly simple and profoundly complex. How may we, as educational researchers, capture and explore learning in its widest sense to better understand how it unfolds? Despite the growing embrace of lifelong and life-wide learning, from the cradle to the grave in all walks of life, much of the research remains rooted in formal education or similar initiatives and arrangements. We still tend to look for learning in the perhaps obvious places, in classrooms, curricula, and credentialing systems. Even though this research has much to offer, by doing so, we often overlook the perhaps quieter, more diffuse learning that happens as people navigate everyday life. By doing so, we also tend to mix up or even confuse two different theoretical notions, education and learning. Education may be one pathway to learning, but learning itself is a much broader adventure. At the same time, one might argue the reverse, that education in its fullest sense is an even broader adventure than learning. Following the well-established insights that learning can take place across diverse social contexts, it is important to advocate for an open and inclusive approach. My talk will move in that direction, but I will also gently underscore the value of thoughtful analytical work and, perhaps more importantly, to invite us as researchers to nurture a deep and ongoing curiosity. Curiosity, I believe, is not just a trait, but a driving force. It pushes us to explore, ask questions, seek out, and not least to sustain meaningful engagement in our scholarly lives. Today, I want to zoom in on those unassuming spaces, spaces that aren't typically marked as educational, yet are rich with learning potential. I will invite you to my research on learning in everyday practices. My curiosity for this topic began over 20 years ago during my PhD on adults in formal education. Through ethnographic fieldwork with so-called non-traditional learners, I came to see how vital it is to understand people's daily lives and social ties to truly grasp their educational journeys. Since then, my research interest has steadily grown and taken me into a number of research projects. While there's much I could share, I'll focus on just a few glimpses from two of them, the particular cases of parenting and dating. In these research projects, I engage with questions that many might consider mundane and basic, yet are surprisingly intricate and deeply layered. How do adults work on themselves to become good parents? What embodied practices do they take up? In what ways do parents come to grips with and resist dominant media narratives? And how is learning mobilized through discourses of dating? In what ways might the gloomy rhetoric around digital dating still harbor transformative potential? Drawing on discourse analysis and qualitative methodologies, I'll share insights from my research on domains that, while probably deeply familiar, raise complex questions about identity, adjustments, transformation, and resistance. Along the way, we will also consider the analytical work, how curiosity, critique, and craft can guide us in reimagining the possibilities for educational research. Research, like craft, demands both discipline and experimentation. At its heart, good quality research should spark curiosity and welcome critique. Real research has texture. It moves, resonates, and leaves a trace. It refuses to sit still. It shifts, questions, and surprises. In that spirit, I will reflect on the generative frictions that arise when we wrestle with theoretical concepts, push the limits of our research methods, and allow ourselves to dwell in discomfort. In using discourse analytical perspectives, I draw attention to the talkative business of learning, which is to address what people say when they say, what people do when they do, and not least what they do not say or do. Another way to talk about this is to claim that when we believe that knowledge, meaning, and understanding are created in relationships between people, the phenomena we study become sociocultural episodes. They do not reside within the individual, but emerge through social interplay, which, however, doesn't rule out physical objects. In such processes, conversation plays the main role. Language is a tool that can be both rigid and flexible. It can appear too clear or almost camouflaging. Learning becomes tied to specific situation and contexts, practices, where knowledge can be valid and valuable without being universally true. As an entry point, I will use the widely accepted notion, lifelong and life-wide learning. Being a catchphrase for many decades, it has, however, also been claimed to be ill-defined, a concept that may mean a lot of things, relating to distinct research agendas and therefore lacks precision and clarity. But instead of considering this a flaw, we may listen to scholars like Michael Osborne, Terry Mays, and Richard Edwards, who wisely argue for turning such shortcomings into possibilities. Ill-defined concepts can help us to look further into practices and activities that tend to be marginalized in educational research. We may rather use it to position ourselves as followers of an expansive view of learning. When we study learning beyond formal education, sometimes concepts like informal and non-formal self-evidently appear. They may well be, but are not always very helpful. Even though these concepts point to key spaces where people share their subjectivities and place in the world, the problem is that they define themselves at what they are not. Our explorative mode rather calls for a sharp, productive, analytical tools, ones that help us tune into the subtleties of experience and context. In flipping the lens and shed light on mechanisms that perhaps are so mundane that we hardly recognize them, we can therefore use the concept of lifelong and life-wide learning to explore, wrestle, dig deep, and even play. What happens when we approach everyday sites that clearly matters to people from the angle of learning? And what happens when we dress educational processes up in another terminology? In locating this interest within adult education research, my ambition is to contribute theoretically, methodologically, and empirically. Rather than trying to portray how learning unfolds through ideas that tend to categorize complexities into oversimplified understandings, I joined scholars who describe learning as multifaceted, fluid, and situated, and through the lens of identity work. This orientation invites a widely accepted positioning of learning as relational, focusing on connections across overlapping spaces and highlighting diverse forms of participation. Instead of what is, we rather look for how, where, when, and together with whom. The places, activities, and people we encounter on a daily basis provide occasions for developing skills, knowledge, and ways of acting in and interacting with the world. Vividly expressed by Jean Lave, how is learning part of the moving, cross-contextual, profoundly interconnected conduct of everyday life? I will therefore argue for the importance to recognize the merits of elaborating workable analytical tools which help us to sharpen our senses and contribute with powerful analysis, and the importance for us as researchers to be ambitious by getting to know, stretch, drift, struggle, and perhaps even fall in love with concepts to bring attention to a wide range of educational phenomena. To unpack the nuances and details of what happens in what emerges as the black boxes of learning, I relate to interdisciplinary research using multiple methods and analytical perspectives. I find myself at the intersection of education, didactics, sociology, cultural studies, and applied linguistics. Wandering along these disciplinary boundaries, we may challenge one another and even clash at times. But we do seem to agree on that learning, like other social phenomena, is not just a single thing. It comes in versions, like a shapeshifter, rather than in fixed form. John Lennon, the famous musician and peace activist, is said to have popularized the quote, "Life is what happens to you while you're busy making other plans." This quote reminds us to stay present and appreciate the moments we often overlook while planning for the future. For researchers, however, it underscores what tickles my curiosity: the fabric of everyday life and the micro-processes that occur when people engage in various activities, habits, and routines, and in all possible ways participate in social practice. By uncovering the small, mundane actions of people, we are able to identify patterns and trends that shape our lives that would otherwise go unnoticed. However, everyday life also entails changes, destabilizations, and reorientations, the transformative, significant moments that reshape our identities and social worlds. In trying to capture this, I use a fine-grained view through close-up analysis on multiple material to reveal how people encounter, negotiate, investigate, solve problems, fix and tweak, to make things work or run more smoothly, without necessarily thinking of it as learning, but rather being occupied with things. Take Peggy, a retired teacher and participant in our research project on what we can learn about ourselves and others by watching entertainment television. Statistics clearly demonstrate the widespread practice of daily television viewing and streaming. Within this domain, the presence of stereotypes, echo chambers, and polarized debates remind us that learning does not always serve noble ends. However, from a slightly different angle, popular culture encounters can also offer valuable knowledge, shaping our attitudes, worlds, and references in fruitful ways. In a research interview, Peggy talks about the drama show Sons of Anarchy and how it changed her view on biker gangs. She believes that entertaining television shows help us to understand that people are more alike than different. Excitedly, she describes the plot, characters, and storyline, saying the show displays that the bikers are not only causing hellishness. It makes me very mindful, she says, of saying hello and smiling at someone who might be going through a hard time. The insights Peggy shares on how even rebellious bikers in leather jackets navigate emotions, ethical dilemmas, and deal with relational matters are valuable in a world full of cultural diversity. Learning from this angle moves beyond acquiring knowledge. It's about changing how we see ourselves and others. It sometimes begins when our assumptions and beliefs are challenged, like in moments of disruption. Such moments can create greater openness and deeper critical thinking. Learning is emotional and personal. It touches our identity, our values, and our sense of meaning. Now, we just have to remind ourselves, everyday lives are spheres of temporal, spatial, and existential dimensions in which we navigate across social domains, and they may be profoundly different. Gender, social class, generation, ethnicity, and the uneven distribution of resources form intersectional patterns that affect our daily contexts. We are recurrently reminded of how different our lives are, depending on a range of various conditions. And there is no doubt that there are many ways to live our everyday lives. But most importantly, we all have one. And at the intersection of the day-to-day stuff and the changing moments, there are a wide range of practices to further explore. In my research, I draw on ideas and concepts from slightly different strands in the discourse analytical landscape. Discourse analysis doesn't have a unitary meaning. It includes quite diverse perspectives, from referring to a concrete stretch of talk or text, to describing the taken for granted ideas that underpin and shape the way we speak and act as members of a specific society. I use it in a broad sense to refer to language in use, in which the argument that language doesn't mirror the real world is fundamental. There are always multiple ways to describe the exact same event or thing, and these descriptions are never neutral. When people talk, they do not just report what has happened, but rather work up a particular version of reality within a specific interactional context. In doing so, they also draw upon and negotiate social norms and culturally shared knowledge. This accentuates the talkative business as essential in trying to contribute to the growing body of learning research. Drawing on the powerful words of James Paul Gee and Michael Hanford, discourse analysis matters because discourse matters. I often return to the concepts governmentality, framing, and positioning. Together they attend to the structure as well as the dynamic features of talk. It suggests how discourses operate and how people make use of various rhetorical elements to explain, claim, justify, invite, excuse, narrate, joke, argue, and share, to mention a few aspects of conversation. The concepts are key in Michel Foucault and Irving Goffman's theoretical frameworks, and none of them, which I think you might agree upon, is pretty straightforward. So we have to be ambitious. Let us therefore consider theory not just as a distant abstract construct, but as a set of tools that shape how we see, speak about, and engage with the world. Anna-Marie Moe beautifully captures this in her work on empirical philosophy. She writes, "It indicates the words, models, metaphors, and syntax that help to shape the ways in which realities are perceived and handled. It connotes the intellectual apparatus that makes it possible for some thoughts to emerge and be articulated, while others are forced into the background or blocked altogether." Theory is not passive, it is generative. It's a call to recognize its power. It opens space for certain realities to be acknowledged by quietly closing the doors on others. It is the architecture behind our understanding, the scaffolding that determines what we can build, what remains invisible. And that choice carries weight. In this light, theory becomes a responsibility. It asks us to be mindful of the lenses we use and to remain open to those we have yet to try on. Before we zoom in on the details in some research examples, let us zoom out to shed light on what may appear as educational in everyday practices. From this angle, a universe of teaching and learning emerges, not confined to any traditional boundaries. Knowledge and skills are no static commodities, but living, breathing forces, constantly offered, reshaped, and rediscovered. People move through countless situations shaped by both spoken and unspoken rules, encountering normative expectations that guide how we're supposed to act, speak, and think. Whether it's in a classroom, at work, with friends, or online, each setting carries its own subtle cues. Some are clearly stated, while others we pick up almost instinctively. They influence how we behave across different social landscapes, sometimes loud and clear, and at other times without us even realizing it. Through the uptake of pedagogical roles, for instance, in and through popular culture, certain voices emerge with authority, whether through expertise, social media influencers, or academic traditions, defining what is seen as good practice or adequate knowledge. These discourses claim the learner positioning, like the novice or the newcomer, identities that come with assumptions, making space for discipline and governing techniques, but also for growth and transformation. Learning practices are not merely initiated, they are actively cultivated. They become dynamic spaces, bearing moments of adjustments, acts of recognition, sparks of resistance, and waves of expansion. Let's start this journey with a few examples from the parenting project. The first example is taken from a qualitative interview study I did some years ago, where I very openly approached adults with various experiences on becoming and being parents. I was curious about how do adults deal with and come to grips with that identity. Becoming a parent is often described as a transformative life event, wherein one is suddenly faced with profound responsibility of nurturing and caring for a new human being. This is said to be an experience marking significant transitions that reshapes one's identity, priorities, and social worlds. At the same time, such experiences are mundane and very familiar to many of us. In this context, it is interesting to notice how multiple actors confront adults with quite explicit expectations, norms, and rules on parenting practices. What counts as valid knowledge highlights some subject positions, while others never seem to be referred to, which may be discussed in light of power relations. In all the interviews, popular culture media on parenting was a recurrent topic. A growing number of actors and sites were eager to consider themselves as resources in what may be seen as the making of contemporary parents. In the interview with 33-year-old Edward, married and the father of 2 children, we talked about the relevance of popular culture sites, not least the genre that has been called parenting television, with notable examples like reality TV shows Super Nanny and Nanny 9/11, helping families with parenting challenges or showcasing their role in children's lives. At the first glance, it would be easy to say that our interviewee Edward adopts a skeptical stance to what parenting television has to offer. Such television shows may be entertaining, but he dismisses them. They are not useful in terms of their educational potential in his role of a parent. However, a close-up analysis reveals that what Edward in fact dismisses is the methods used with the aim of solving family troubles. In terms of identity work, this piece illustrates something really important. Edward finds the popular culture media format valuable, but rather in the sense of how they allow you to take a look at yourself as a parent and say, here are some things I don't manage well. Perhaps I can work on them. Like a general appeal addressed to everybody and no one. Hey, I'm really struggling here. How do you do it? And that's a good thing, according to Edward. What this example illustrates is how to open yourself up constructs a compelling social norm, suggesting that everyone has the potential to succeed, life becomes what you yourself make of it, and learning is never complete. People are invited and encouraged to turn their eyes inwards to reflect, question, and share their experiences. This links to Foucault's notion on governmentality and confession, where such talk is crucial technique for knowledge of the self. People can cultivate themselves to assume certain ways of life. Confessional activities emphasize self-guidance, discipline, and regulation, where people at the one and the same time act as the governor and the governed. They enable, normalize, and improve. It brings hope because it's possible to change and become more skillful. However, it also tends to homogenize and strengthen some subjectivities and rule out other ones. Even though critical objecting to some aspects of the genre, parents are active in the co-construction of a learning case. Our second example is taken from the same interview study. We meet Elisa, 40 years old, divorced with 4 children in shared custody with her ex-husband. In the interview, Elisa tells us that when her first child was a newborn baby, she tried to figure out what parenthood was really about by reading magazines, books, and websites. So the media and popular culture is depicted a resource for developing and refining parental skills. But as we will find out, she is picky. Similar to Edward, she is also skeptical and definitely from time to time rejects what the media has to offer on the subject. In this example, we will do a close-up analysis and zoom in on the details of talk to better understand how rhetorics are key in learning practices. In contrast to magazines, books, and websites on parenting, reality TV shows such as Super Nanny are something Elisa never watches. When I, the interviewer, ask for an elaboration, she laughingly explains that she never agrees with the nannies. By repeating such intense words, or what has been called extreme case formulations, Elisa takes an opposing stance. She clearly disapproves of similar programs, evaluates them as awful, and even questions what she claims to be a military regime. There seems to be no doubt that she rejects the expert knowledge and advice appearing in that particular genre. However, following the excerpt, Elisa refines her stance and rather claims that there are exceptions when the genre actually can contribute to parenting, as she points to families that are chaotic and totally confused. Depicted like this, such TV shows are connected to highly unusual cases, distinct from what is considered well-functioning, average, and normal. In this way, Elisa positions herself as a parent belonging to the latter group, not in need of such pedagogical interventions. She states, "It doesn't really appeal to me. It's like very strange, distant, odd, and definitely signals such portrayals as unfamiliar." In the example, it can easily be noticed how we do things with words. Stances are taken and negotiated in terms of what is seen as adequate. People perform who they are and wish to be. They position themselves as particular kind of subjects in relation to others by utilizing and selecting specific elements as resources. Extreme case formulations are highly prevalent, forming a style, relatively stable repertoires that people can draw upon to fashion themselves as members of particular practices, coming together around a shared orientation, what I have called the knowledgeable parenting style. Styles are part of systems of distinction that only become meaningful when compared and contrasted to other styles. Context and contextualization are ascribed into everyday talk and clearly important when positioning oneself in a broader social landscape. Our next examples are taken from the dating project. Similar to the parenting project, this research also has a qualitative design where we, in addition to individual and focus group interviews, have included multiple data sources like podcasts, television, newspapers, and websites. Dating remains a hot topic in public debates where new practices and vocabularies such as swipes, matches, situationship, ghosting, and benching emerge. Dating apps like Tinder, Match.com, and Grindr has become a vital part of many adults' lives and are widely used for a range of reasons, from seeking love and casual sex to entertainment, validation, or simply passing time. Despite their popularity and promise of an efficient way to find love, stories on digital dating often highlight their pitfalls. The dating landscape, then, is shaped by shifting norms, tensions, and social complexity, a space where people often collide mindlessly, trying to navigate an uncertain terrain. In our interviews, we find what we have called the dystopian narrative on dating, where dehumanizing terms and conditions are key issues. Several interviewees highlight that dating disappointments have fundamentally altered their self-image and view on other people in a negative manner. Words like cynical, pessimistic, superficial, and thick-skinned are frequently used to describe unfavorable dating experiences. As 22-year-old Oliver remarks, "I'm more reserved now. I think it's a bit of fear of rejection. It could be. So, no, I haven't changed for the better." But there is also Ellen in her 30s who describes how she nevertheless finds value in troublesome dating. Ellen says, "I believe that the somehow odd and negative experiences I had have perhaps made me more prepared for the next, possibly genuine person, and perhaps made me more appreciative of those who don't send me dick pics, who are genuinely nice people." Showing how it is possible to navigate the dating scene while cultivating a strong sense of identity and autonomy, we have also discovered the alternative stories. Turning the dominant narrative upside down, these stories rather reveal a progressive narrative, from doom and gloom to growth and development. My initial interest, however, where it all started some year ago, was to wrestle and play a little bit more with the concept of learning. An intriguing aspect, quite easy to notice in contemporary times, is a widely accepted usage of word, metaphors, and repertoires that may be associated with knowledge, competence, and skills. People's need to improve is the focal point, which manifests learning as a mode within and towards life, and as such, a powerful disciplining discourse. A key plot is how both lay and expert voices consistently argue that various aspects of our everyday lives are tricky and require considerable effort and practice to manage successfully. And dating is no exception. A quick look at popular culture easily reveals clear examples of this train of thought. In the third example, the media itself is put under the magnifying glass. Dominant discourses often display dating as challenging, troublesome, exhausting, and at times even dangerous. Adults are therefore subjected to a whole army of professionals to educate, support, and discipline them on this matter. Challenging life situations may trigger the development of new knowledge and practices, so there is value in examining closely the resources provided to manage the dating landscape. This newspaper feature is taken from the New York Times ahead of Valentine's Day. The feature reads, "Especially around Valentine's Day, it's easy to find advice about sustaining a successful marriage, with suggestions for date nights and romantic dinners for two. But as we spend more and more of our lives outside marriage, it's equally important to cultivate the skills of successful singlehood. And doing that doesn't just benefit people who never marry. It can also make for more satisfying marriages." In this way, the feature manifests that both marriage and singlehood imply domains of learning. Taking up a discourse analytical stance and incorporating a critical lens, we can observe a few things. In this piece, the writer uses positively charged language to portray romantic relationships as teachable and learnable. The term skills is crucial. It reframes our relations as something that can be practiced, refined, and mastered, much like any other competence. The quote suggests that ongoing learning and identity work is required. It conceals a textual code that prepares the reader to actively engage, to cultivate, reinforcing the idea to position as a learner. And learners are not left to wander. Guidance and tips for successful performance is highly accessible and constantly on offer. Now, what intrigued me was how this happens. In what ways do people together create and establish a learning frame in talk? From a wide range of lifestyle television available as potential cases for research, I picked a dating show entitled Faith, Hope and Love that was broadcast by a Swedish television channel. The participants were priests, vicars, and other religious professionals, so the show has some similarities with Farmer Wants a Wife, which I guess some of you are familiar with. Briefly, the television shows features 4 or 5 adults who participate with the aim of changing their single lives, genuinely seeking serious relationships. The dating process is closely followed by a camera, intertwined with comments from each participant and their dates. In face-to-face interactions, the participants and the host of the television show regularly meet to talk. From my selected angle, these talk events illustrate how the interlocutors collaborate on making learning a relevant and decisive framing for what is taking place. Together, they produce and reproduce the idea that knowledgeability and skillfulness matter. Within this framing, they make particular subject positions available through the use of distinctive resources, words, phrases, and examples, invoking them as pedagogical subjects. In the final example, we will meet Anna, a 35-year-old divorced priest, in a face-to-face talk with Melvin, the host of the show. When we enter the excerpt, they sit down for a cup of coffee in Anna's living room. Anna is going on a date that very evening, and she finds it all really exciting. The sequence begins with Melvin framing the activity by asking, "Are you good at dating?" which promotes the idea of adequate conduct as a key concern. In this way, he also claims self-assessment from Anna on this matter. After a pause, Anna responds as she carefully confirms this a possible fact. The question is dealt with as an acceptable starting point, focusing on how to assess her experience and performance with dating so far. However, Anna immediately changes her mind and rather claims that it's confident in meeting people generally. Melvin confirms Anna's correction somewhat and encourages her to continue. She then offers the reservation, "I think," which opens for the possibility to discuss the matter in more detail. In the next turn, Melvin negotiates Anna's response as he challenges her stance and requests a different answer. Contextualizing the dialogue into the dating situation, he states, "But you're not used to meeting people with a thought in mind, is it you and me who will spend our life together?" This calls Anna's initial response into question. It rather seems to evolve around a competing frame where she's confident, her professional work, while the context made relevant here is dating. As such, Melvin subtly positions Anna as someone new to that particular word, lacking significant experience. It's a shift that brings in norms from elsewhere, and reshapes how their roles are understood in the moment. This seemingly catches Anna by surprise. She starts to laugh and adjusts herself. No, of course not. In a lowered voice, Melvin smilingly adds that the situation is quite unusual, to which Anna confirms that it beyond any doubt obviously differs from what she initially claimed. Anna now, in collaboration with Melvin, rather positions herself as novice, neither as confident nor competent as she may appear in situations beyond dating. Within the established frame, knowledgeability becomes a joint focus of attention, which makes it possible for Melvin to represent Anna distinctively. She needs to practice and learn. Taking a closer look at conversational exchanges reveals how we use language to shape encounters and activities as learning events. Constructing pedagogical identities and activities, knowledgeability defines the role, emphasizing the need for preparation, practice, and skill building. Together, the interlocutors build a consensus on how learning is necessary to navigate the situation, where the subject positioning makes it possible to establish an apprentice-like relationship, where someone is a coach while someone else is a coachee. The uses of question and answer format is particularly interesting. Are you good at dating? Well, but what do we know? Did you practice this? Framing skillfulness as key to success may well empower adults. However, it also normalizes a particular way of engaging with daily life, one that subtly governs oneself and others. Drawing on these few but hopefully clarifying illustrations, everyday life is saturated with powerful pedagogical forces, subtle, complex, and often overlooked. Rather than being straightforward, these forces shape and foster how we talk, act, and interact, bearing learning potentials beyond formal institutions. Knowledge relations are inherently flexible, assuming diverse forms that nonetheless reveal underlying patterns. They unfold as both symmetric and asymmetric, shaped by dynamics of power, access, and reciprocity. They also emerge as self-initiated, other-initiated, and co-initiated, each mode contributing to a rich tapestry of possible interactions. Now, these insights raise perhaps eternal, yet urgent questions for educational research. How does student participation resonate with and diverge from the pedagogies of everyday life? What roles might education play in empowering adults, not only to adapt, but to critically transform the world around them? What kind of research do we need to better understand the distinctions and intersections of diverse practices? And what forms of educational spaces are necessary to foster critical thinking and resilience against ignorance, misinformation, and disinformation? Drawing on inspiration from Gert Biesta's work, this could be reformulated as a call to carefully consider what is distinctly unique about education, taking education and its everyday practices seriously. To make the dominant discourses stutter and genuinely broaden the ways we imagine and cultivate meaningful lives, we need critical, close-up perspectives. We have to ask ourselves, whose truths are being taught, whose futures are being shaped, and whose agenda are we serving? To truly grasp the complexities of modern life, we must delve into the full spectrum of lifelong and life-wide learning. This means exploring learning that spans a lifetime, from cradle to career to retirement, and across all domains of life, including practices such as dating and parenting. After all, people's everyday lives are not made up of separate units with clear boundaries, but are instead blurred and intertwined. It may sound a bit grandiose, but to recognize these dynamics is essential if we are to envision and create a world that is stronger, more just and inclusive for everyone. Through the perhaps unconventional cases on learning in everyday practice, I have addressed some key issues for educational research. Before I leave you today, let me share a few experiences and reflections on analytical work. True research doesn't follow a straight path. It may be unusual, unpredictable, and even uncomfortable, but that's where its power lies. As Catherine Marshall and Gretchen Rossman wisely remind us, real research is often confusing, messy, intensely frustrating, and fundamentally non-linear. Embrace that mess. Research conditions may vary widely across countries and contexts, shaped by differing academic traditions, funding structures, and societal expectations. Even within a shared framework, what is possible in one setting may be constrained or encouraged differently in another. Even so, I have a wish and hope for us as educational researchers. Stay radically curious. It's the most underrated superpower. Think with your heart, your body, and your lived experience, not just your intellect. Play with concepts, bend the rules of methodology to craft precise, tailored, and meaningful research, a kind of fine carpentry of knowledge. Step beyond your familiar networks, engage in dialogue, debate, build critical friendships that challenge and stretch your thinking. As we step back from the intricacies of everyday pedagogy and the creative chaos of research, let's carry forward this invitation to stay open, to stay curious, and to stay critical. Whether you're navigating a classroom, a research project, or a street corner conversation, you are already participating in the co-creation of knowledge. So cultivate your explorative mode. Let your ideas breathe, bend, and surprise you. Wrestle with your intellectual monsters, not to tame them, but to let them lead you somewhere new. Let us dare to honor the messiness and many phases of education and learning. Because in those entangled moments, we find tiny fragments and shards of meaning that can contribute to the body of knowledge that we cultivate together in our research communities. For those who might be interested, we have published some pieces on analytical work in qualitative research where you perhaps may find some inspiration. Thank you for your time and attention.